Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 6 of Logicast, the AWS News podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Karl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined today by John, as always, Goodall, my ever-faithful standing host. How are you doing today, John?
Wondering what you're going to call me next time, because it changes every week.
Well, the as always part is now in your name badge, so I just have to read that out. I am quite good at reading things out loud, so yeah, it's whatever just trips off the tongue at the time. But I think hopefully listeners are now used to the fact that you're here every week. But our guest is not here every week. It's his first time on the podcast. We are joined today by fellow AWS Community Builder Dave Hall. How are you doing today, Dave?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Karl.
You're very welcome. Tell us a bit about what you do for the community, what you do for a living, where you come from, etc.
Yeah, so I'm based in Canberra, Australia, and there I run an independent contracting and consulting business. Over the last few years, I've been really interested in event-driven automation, and so using a lot of serverless stuff for automation and integration, and throwing in a bit of AI and ML because we've all got to play buzzword bingo these days.
Absolutely. So, which category
event-driven's a bit buzzword, isn't it?
Oh, EDA is, yeah. Which category does that put you in then in the community builders program?
I'm a serverless community builder.
Yeah.
Yep.
Same as John. So, have you done your renewal application yet?
I did.
You're keen.
Yeah, I wanted to get it out the way, and I've got some new content coming up soon, and I didn't want to get accused of just putting it all in at the last minute.
So that will be for the next renewal window. You'll have content that's almost a year old.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's funny, isn't it? You've got to kind of, if you want to publish something in February, it's best to not just hang on to it for a bit, do it in March, and then use it next year.
Yeah.
Or just not include it in your application.
Yeah, because it's only two pieces. And like, Karl, you and I have had this conversation before. I've done 41 of these in the last kind of 12 months, and a blog and a couple of talks and various bits and pieces. Like, well, do I put one in like from the middle of last year just to sort of show, no, I do them all the time? Or do I do ones that I really like that happen to be at somewhat suspicious times?
In case listeners are wondering what we're talking about, we are all part of the AWS Community Builders program, which is a community initiative in AWS for people who create content, technical content to help other builders learn about AWS. And we have to renew once a year to remain in that program. And the renewal window is right now. So John, Dave, and I are all in the process of, well, Dave's done his already. So that's pretty good because the window only opened, I think, on, was it the 5th or something like that?
Sometime in the last week.
So I think we've got 6 weeks to do it. So I'll be doing it in another 5 weeks. That's the way I roll. John has already written 10 versions of his renewal application and is currently probably getting AI to choose the best one.
No. I wouldn't dare.
They actually say that you're not allowed to use Gen AI in your renewal application on some of the fields.
Yeah, I think you would be allowed to generate the content, but I think if you'd written a bunch of versions and just asked it to choose, that's probably...
I don't know. I might potentially use Grammarly just to make sure it sounds okay, but that's probably as far as I'd push it. But no, I've got the questions out. I've logged in and I've kind of written them offline because I will rewrite them 3 or 4 times. I mean, allegedly, it's just based on the content that you submit, but I struggle believing that because if it was, why would they ask you the other questions?
Absolutely.
You could submit a bad...
Sorry, go on, Dave.
Yeah, you could submit a bad submission and really good content and see if your theory is correct or not.
I'm not A/B testing my renewal. I'm not doing that.
Well, it's fine. You might get back in again, like I did, if you don't get renewed. So,
and then I could have 2 backpacks.
Yeah, exactly. And you'd have to start again at year 1, wouldn't you? So you'd have year 1 swag twice, year 2 swag twice. So yeah, but it's a bit of a painful way to test the process. Yeah, probably better just to do your best and put your best foot forward on the first attempt. So anyway, we're not here to waffle on about reapplying
Panicking
for the
about renewals.
AWS Community Builder process. We are here to generate some content, which will hopefully get us renewed into the Community Builder program. But that content is specifically about AWS news. And so as regular listeners to the podcast will know, once a week, I curate a list of AWS news, which I share via my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John and I pick a selection of the articles that we'd like to talk about with our guests. So we do, of course, have a bunch of articles that we shared with Dave ahead of the weekend. And the first of those is an article from the AWS database blog. The title is 2024, a year of innovation and growth for Amazon DynamoDB. So it's possible we've spoken about some of these innovations on DynamoDB before as they came out, but this is a bit of a recap, not a reinvent recap, but a DynamoDB recap of the announcements and innovations for DynamoDB in 2024. So there's lots of them here, and I'm not sure that we're going to be able to, in the time we have available, go through all of them. So, John, what are your thoughts? What's your favourite one?
Price reductions, obviously.
We all love a good price reduction, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean the two that they call out here is significant price reductions, and okay, significant I think is a bit of a stretch. It's significant as a percentage figure because it's like half, but DynamoDB is really cheap, so you're probably not going to see a big deal on your bill. But okay, you know what they say: there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, and this is a good statistic because it's cutting it in half. Cool. But significant price reductions on on-demand throughput and global tables. The on-demand throughput is more interesting to me than global tables because global tables have a fairly limited level of application because, for those that don't know, DynamoDB is a regional service, but with the application of global tables, you can replicate with now, another thing in this list, strong consistency. So it's always consistent all of the time across multiple regions around the world, and you can just use the one table as if it was local, which is brilliant, and we like that a lot. But I'm more interested in the on-demand throughput because my attitude towards DynamoDB throughput is just use pay per request or on-demand and stop thinking about it. Well, but you can do provisioned and you can do this and you can do that. Yeah, okay, you can do all of those things. And I've sat there and I've done the maths, and if you are at 100% utilization of your read and write capacity provision and you're accurate with it and you have auto scaling in place, it is cheaper per request to provision your concurrency, but not by a lot. So just use on demand and stop thinking about it. And if they've made that cheaper, more better. I like that because, again, the most expensive cost that you're going to have in any sort of serverless or event-driven type architecture is not actually likely to be your infrastructure. It's likely to be your engineering team building the damn thing. So put it on demand, move on. So I like that one. Anything that makes that a better sell is good in my book.
Dave, was one that jumped out for you?
So there's an omission here that I think stands out. The price reduction on demand is great, but the free tier of DynamoDB is only available for provisioned. There's no free tier for on demand. I think would be nice for Amazon to provide a certain level of on demand for smaller projects, which then encourages people to use on demand as the default rather than starting off with provision.
Fair enough. What about these zero ETL integrations? I know that was a big thing at reInvent. So there's a couple of zero ETL integrations announced with Redshift and SageMaker Lakehouse. So the big topic for last year, zero ETL integrations. What do you think about these?
I try not to think about ETL if I can help it.
Well, now you don't have to because you've got zero ETL integrations between Redshift and SageMaker
direct integrations are good. They are if you need that sort of thing. Again, it's I feel a limited pool of customers that are going to need this because if you are running in Dynamo, I haven't found, and maybe this is just my limited data set, probably is, but I haven't found particularly large data sets really being held in Dynamo. They're used for other things, I find, and people are already kind of exfilling data out of Dynamo that if they need to hang on to it, because at high levels, the storage for Dynamo can get quite spendy. It's not, vast amounts of money, sure, but at decent sizes, you're cheaper putting things in relational databases. And if you need to move things into Redshift, if you need to move them into, what's the other one, SageMaker Lakehouse for data lakes and stuff, you probably already have a process built for this that you're running and using and doing. So it's good for people that are kind of coming into the space and going, well, I want to use Dynamo, but I still need to do all my kind of data mining and all that jazz after the fact. So I can do it this way instead without having to put together like a glue job or dirty lambdas or whatever. So it's good, but it's not earth shattering by any measure. None of these zero into ETL integrations I find are, apart from maybe the Aurora one.
Dirty Lambdas sounds like a cocktail. Maybe we should serve that at AWS event.
Well, they do
event.
serverless espresso. Maybe we could do serverless cocktails.
Yeah, with dirty lambdas. Yeah. Any thoughts on the DAX innovations, DynamoDB Accelerator?
I've never used it. I've never had the need
needed to
use it. Yeah.
Dynamo is really quick to begin with. So,
yeah.
Okay, I know about it because I need to for the exam, but I've never used it. I've never needed to use it because Dynamo responds really quick to start with.
I think that DAX is a bit like the warm throughput feature. It's one of those things for nervous managers to kind of go, we want to have, all the features that guarantee throughput and stuff. So, they'll spend on DAX or warm throughput or both, just so they can tick those boxes on the project plan. Good luck to Amazon getting money out of people with that, but I don't think most teams need it.
Comfort factor. Tick all the boxes. Give ourselves the best chance of performing. Yeah,
it's like GitHub Advanced Security. Like the name is there, so teams go, we're paid for the highest security option.
Yeah,
and doubled our bill.
Belt and braces, absolutely. Satisfy the auditors. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Well, there's a whole bunch of other innovations in here, and we could probably talk about this all day, but we have got some other articles that we would also like to discuss. So if you're interested in reading the article, it is, of course, in the show notes. So go and check out some of those other DynamoDB innovations. But let's skip along to our second article for this week, and this one is all about cloud financial management. It's on the AWS Cloud Financial Management blog, and the title of the post is reInvent 2024 Cost Optimization Highlights That You Were Not Expecting. So a couple of things. The first one is really around Bedrock, and you might not be expecting it. You're probably not using Bedrock yet because it's such a new service. So, but if you are using it heavily, then there's some ways that you can now start to optimize your costs. So, John, thoughts around this? We are using Bedrock, not heavily, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting title. It doesn't fit. It feels a little bit clickbaity as a title, but it's sort of fair because the cost optimization stuff that you expect tend to be direct cost reductions in things like EC2s and Dynamo and Aurora and all that kind of thing. And then they sort of talk about new instance families and better price to performance, which is not necessarily a cost reduction at the same level, but you could go to a lower level because it performs better, those kinds of things. These aren't things that kind of break those normal headlines, so it's worth a kind of a dedicated roundup. The Bedrock stuff I'm not really going to go into because if you know you need it, go read the article. It talks about caching your prompts and stuff so you're not calling back out. And surprise, surprise, it says you can also save money by optimizing your costs by using a model from the Amazon Nova family. Hold for applause. Like, okay, whatever, shock horror. More interesting, and I only learned about this one at the reInvent recap, actually, which is a bit poor on my part because I was at reInvent and completely missed this one, which is, I suppose, why I go to recaps as well, is intelligent tiering for FSX for Open ZFS or ZFS, depending on your location. Now, what is this? So FSX is File Server X, I think is what it stands for. And the idea being it's an NFS that isn't EFS, effectively. There's 4 flavors. You've got for Lustre, NetAtt OnTap, Windows, if you really desperately need that, and OpenZFS, which is your kind of traditional NAS sort of OS. What this does is it adds intelligent tiering to that particular flavor of OpenFSX, of FSX for OpenZFS. Right? What's intelligent tiering? Well, if you've used S3 at any time in the last 5 years, you've probably used it. It's the I don't know my access patterns. Please just put it in the storage tier that's cheapest for me. please and thank you, based on my access patterns. And now it's on FSX. I keep wanting to call it Open FSX, but it's not. It's a very long name. And this is really cool because you can then start to take advantage of this pre-rolled management layer for you on another service, which is great. I think EFS supports this as well. But alongside this, and it's not kind of in that list, but again, I picked up on this at the recap, the lines are blurring between EFS being Linux specific, serverless, scalable, pay for what you use file storage, and FSX for Open ZFS basically is becoming the same thing now. Most of the flavors of FSX, you have to put nodes in, provision storage, and kind of all the rest of it. Now for this, all you're actually having to do is provision your throughput level. So you say, I want this much, please. And you can do that on EFS as well. You just don't have to. So the lines are becoming really blurry now between which one do you want to use between EFS and FSX. And again, with the performance improvements we've seen over the last year or so in EFS, it's really not an easy choice, because it used to be, I'm using Linux, I don't particularly care for my throughput, EFS, versus I really need high throughput, FSX. Now the lines are really, really blurry, and the cost model is different as well. So this is interesting, and I like this. I like this a lot. Don't so much care about SageMaker. Target tracking and cloud auto scaling, again, they're quite cool. And again, I learned about these at the recap, which is again a little bit embarrassing, but there we go. That's why we do these things. Scaling your auto scaling applications is always a challenge, because you can never really work out what kind of metric you should be scaling against, whether you should do simple or step or target tracking. And if you are doing any of these things, what's the level that you need to scale out at? And you end up with this kind of finger in the wind sort of estimate. I think my server, one server or whatever, my baseline infrastructure can handle this level of requests or this level of CPU, which equates to this level of requests, before it starts to fall over and cause problems and needs to scale up again. So you then optimize for, well, I'm going to go slightly below that, and I'm going to do things like warm pause, and I'm going to optimize by start times and all this jazz, so that you scale quickly when you need to. And it's always really challenging working out what that kind of point is, and it's always a bit finger in the wind. This is really good because target tracking is great. You can just sort of say, at the ASG level, I want you to track requests at the load balancer. Thank you very much. Without having to do custom CloudWatch alarms and stuff, which is brilliant, actually, because it's just another thing you don't have to code. Love that so much. And then the predictive stuff is really cool as well, because, okay, you need data in AWS for this to work, and you kind of have to turn it on and it tracks going forwards. But once it's got a reasonable pattern of data, it can say, oh, every Friday I have a spike, or once a year on particular holiday sale I have a spike, and it will pre-scale for you, which is great. You do still need to do some sort of target tracking or simple scaling on top of your predictive, because predictive scales out but never back in again, which is important to know. But this is really, really cool.
Nice. I'm curious, Dave, do you care about SageMaker? Because
I
John
do
doesn't,
actually
and
care.
he skipped over that. Well,
Yeah.
maybe you could tell us what the cost optimization opportunity is around SageMaker.
Yeah, when John said he didn't care about it, I was like, oh, cool, one for me to talk about. Because I don't care about FSX because it doesn't work with Lambdas. But SageMaker scaling to 0, I haven't played with this yet, because a lot of the stuff I run, if it needs a GPU, I run it on a provisioned instance on SageMaker, and I think we'll talk about that a bit later, why we have to do it that way. But this now allows, during quiet times, to spin those instances down. I need to play around with it, but if I can get away with doing inference on CPUs, I do that at the moment, because I can then use SageMaker Serverless, which I just say this much memory, this many maximum concurrent requests. And it's just like working with Lambda, but it's got some stuff around it for running models. So yeah, this I think will be really useful for workloads where you have that inconsistent traffic patterns and GPU.
Cool. Well, I'm glad one of us cares about it.
Only thing I use a GPU for is gaming.
I don't game. I've got too much other stuff to do.
Too much work. Yeah.
Mini Metro on my phone. That's gaming for me.
On that note, let's move along to our third article for this week. And this is an article from the AWS for M&E blog, which I think it might be the first time we've ever featured an article from the AWS for Media and Entertainment's blog, because it's not even a blog that I was aware existed, to be honest.
No, I think it's been spun out of content delivery, I think.
Possibly, but I guess it's a industry specific, isn't it? Media and entertainment industry specific blog. This post is all about migrating workflows from Amazon Elastic Transcoder to AWS MediaConvert, because as I think it mentions somewhere in the blog post, oh yes, it's in bold right there in the second paragraph, that Amazon Elastic Transcoder is going to be discontinued on the 13th of November 2025. So if you are using Amazon Elastic Transcoder in any of your workflows, you're going to want to read this blog post and listen to what we've got to say, because you're going to need to migrate to something else. And obviously the AWS recommendation is to migrate them to Elemental MediaConvert, which we use for transcribing our podcast, I think.
Transcoding.
Transcoding, sorry. Yeah. And then we use something else to transcribe it. Bedrock with, we're using a Nova model yet? I don't think we are.
No, we use Transcribe to transcribe.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Read the other blog post. Read John's blog post about how that
read
works.
my blog where we talk about what we do with these recordings.
Yeah. Anyway, MediaConvert is a part of that workflow somewhere. Dave, I think you had some thoughts around this one.
No, this is like SageMaker for me.
You don't care about this one?
I do not care about this. I don't use any of the services. This is one for John.
Well, you are going to be, you're not going to be using it, but you are going to be converted by it.
Flowing through it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Ooh, that's
I can finally say I've used it.
Oh, that's a horrid thought. Okay, so I have used both of these a reasonable amount. I've used MediaConvert a lot more than Elastic Transcoder because customer of ours used Elastic Transcoder, and that was just kind of what they were using. Elastic Transcoder has been on the deprecation path for I don't know how long, but a long time now, years and years and years. So it's kind of finally coming to a head. Like a couple of years ago when I last logged into Elastic Transcoder, the first thing it would say was, you shouldn't be using this. You should go and use Elemental MediaConvert. And Karl called it AWS MediaConvert. The full name of the service is AWS Elemental MediaConvert. And I believe that's because a lot of these services came from a company called Elemental that AWS bought, is what I think has happened to that name there. But right, MediaConvert. It's a brilliant tool, but it does exactly what you think it does. It converts media from one format to another, which is called transcoding, which is where Elastic Transcoder gets its name. It's what you're doing. You're kind of opening the packaging and then you're repackaging it into something else. We use it to turn the M4As, our recording software, spits out and turn them into MP3s, because Spotify and folks like that prefer MP3s to M4As. They just do. So that's what we use. In terms of why you should migrate, well, because transcode is going away. If you want to keep transcoding your media, you kind of going to have to. The services aren't terribly different in terms of how you use them. You set templates up and you kind of put your job into a template, and they're both services that you can kind of interact with in the console if you want, but your best bet is to do it with something like a Lambda, because that way you can do nice event-driven process where you put a file in a bucket and the Lambda fires and it spits it back into another bucket or a different part of the same bucket or whatever. MediaConvert supports a whole heap of different and newer kind of packaging and bigger packaging as well. So you get much better codec support. It will do video resolution up to 8K and frame rates up to 120 FPS. I don't know if it's doing 8K 120, which is really big, but it will probably do 4K 120 quite happily, like 8K 30, something like that. I think it will cope with quite well. It's got a whole bunch of other features in there as well, which is really worth knowing about. It will do things like media splitting if you want to do like streaming media, which is great if you're doing anything with user-generated content, whereby someone, say, uploads a video and then you transcode it into a whole bunch of different formats and sizes, so you can do different resolutions and stuff, and then spit it out in something like an Apple streaming compatible format, which then you get from your one big MP4 file, you get like 100 little ones in a manifest file, and you pull the manifest and you just kind of keep pulling them. And that's really cool as well. But generally, this is worth doing because you're going to have to anyway. So you may as well just get on with it. Pricing is as you'd expect for this sort of service, pay as you use. I don't think you can do, no, you can do provision pricing as well, because you do things like queues. So you can create your own queues and just sort of keep them hot. But by and large, particularly outside of people like the BBC or the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, or whoever, you're not going to be putting that much media through. You're not Netflix, so just do the on demand with a standard queue and you'll be fine. And again, don't think about it, which is sort of the big thing for me about serverless, is scale to zero and you don't have to think about it. Just use the thing. But this is all cool. This is all really good. We like this as a service. I've used this on and off for several years, and we're going to process a lot through this generally. In terms of your input and output format, yes, there's a big Q&A at the bottom of the article, which you should go and read if you care about those sorts of things. But by and large, anything that you could do in Transcoder, you can do in Elemental MediaConvert, and you should just get on with migrating.
Cool. Well, I'm not going to ask Dave what he thinks, because I know he doesn't care. So on that note, let's move along to our next article for this week, which is on the register. Always love a good LReg headline. It's not one of the better ones, but always a little bit tongue-in-cheek. This article is all about a new potential security compromise that has been identified. The title of the article is "Abandoned AWS S3 buckets can be reused in supply chain attacks that would make SolarWinds look insignificant," thereby implying that there's a potentially some big attacks which could be
I love
launched
the
as a result
subtitle
of
on this. The strapline is great.
"When customers don't clean up after themselves, part 97.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Classic LReg headline. Anyway, Dave, do you care about this one? Have you any thoughts around this one? Yeah.
This is one I care about. It's interesting that the register is calling it a new attack. This is not a particularly new thing. When S3 bucket, the namespace is globally unique. So if you have a bucket, you stop using it, someone else can take that name. And one of the features of S3 is that you can put stuff in there and then serve it out over the web, which sounds great. The issue is, if you ever delete your bucket, that namespace becomes available for anyone else. And I forgot to check the documentation earlier today, but I believe it's an hour or two from when you delete the bucket to the namespace becoming available for anyone else to use. And about 5 years ago, one of my clients was doing cleanup. It wasn't me, definitely not me, was going through cleaning up old buckets. And they had a bucket that had assets that were embedded in a bunch of websites. Someone deleted that bucket. By the time tickets started coming in going, there's errors on websites, and people realized that the bucket had been deleted, by the time they went to claim the name of the bucket, someone had already grabbed it. And there was a security company around back then that was crawling the web, finding references to S3 buckets on websites. And they had a list, and they were just going through and grabbing any of those names when they became available. And initially, we went to Amazon and said, hey, they've stolen the bucket. And Amazon's like, are they using it maliciously? And we're like, no. And they're like, nothing we can do. And I think it is a real problem, but it comes back to S3 buckets. The namespace is global. So even before that incident, I advise people never expose an S3 bucket publicly. If you want to serve content out of S3, put CloudFront in front of it, because that provides a level of abstraction. So you're not revealing the names of your buckets publicly, because if you do, there's a chance someone will hijack it and then use it maliciously.
No notes. Spot on. Don't serve content out of public S3 buckets. Just don't do it.
So for my benefit, though, once they hijack the namespace, what can they actually do with that?
Well, they know, like, you've got JavaScript being included from this file name into your website. They can drop a JavaScript file there that is then injecting malicious ads into your website. Or, they could be, if you have authentication on your website, they can start throwing fake login forms and whatever. So, or they could start swapping out some of your images for inappropriate stuff, which does brand reputational damage to your brand. So I'm not going to sit here for the next half an hour and suggest everything you can do if you hijack a bucket, but you could have some fun with it.
I mean, the obvious one is you can also get JavaScript-based crypto miners. That's kind of the obvious one. Is you can just start mining crypto in other people's websites on other people's computers, and it would never come back to you.
Well, there we go. So definitely one to be aware of, and the answer is don't expose your buckets.
Just don't hold it that way.
On that note, let's move along to our final article for this week, which is, I'm sure, one that both of you are going to have some pretty strong opinions on, being community builders in the serverless category. This is an article on Forbes by Jana Kiram, MSV, who's quite an influencer in the tech press. And the title of the article is "A Decade of AWS Lambda. Has Serverless Delivered on Its Hype?" There's no question mark in the title, though, bizarrely, but it is a question. Has serverless delivered on its hype? Being serverless community builders, I'm sure you've both got very strong opinions on this. So, Dave, I'm gonna let you go first before John share your opinion, and then we'll see what John's got to say.
Yeah, so I read this article. It's very well written, except the sub-editor let us down with the missing question mark. But yeah, really good article. It ties in with some of the discussion we had on the recap panel discussion down in Melbourne a couple of weeks ago. And the lack of GPUs is a big point in the article. I think that Amazon really needs to offer GPUs on serverless SageMaker at least, but given serverless SageMaker is running on Firecracker, if they can do it for SageMaker, they can do it for Lambda, and they can also do it for Fargate. I suspect that Amazon makes a fair bit of money out of instances which are sitting there with people's ML workloads that are idle for 16 hours a day because it's only doing stuff during business hours. So I can't confirm that, but that's my suspicion, that there's too much money to be made in not doing that. The rest of the article, I think the discussion about the enterprise not jumping on board with serverless, it depends on where you go looking. I go work with enterprise clients, and some of them, they're doing a lot of stuff with serverless. They've got teams that really understand the event-driven model, all of that stuff. Whereas there's other parts of smaller organizations where they think that it's too complicated or whatever. So I don't think that it's enterprise doesn't get it, smaller teams do. I think it's more just a general headspace of the different engineering teams. The one miss in the article, though, is it's very Lambda focused. Like, it's there in the title. Serverless is way more than Lambda functions. There's, probably 15 to 20 services I could rattle off straight away, which we would agree are serverless. And then if you believe Amazon's marketing department, there's probably another 10 that aren't really serverless that they'll claim that are.
Yeah, no real notes. The enterprise versus SMB kind of characterization is an interesting one, and you're absolutely not wrong. But I think it's a factor of the bill. Because if you look at an enterprise, they might have massive Lambda usage, but Lambda wouldn't particularly show up on their bill. It'll be a rounding error in the territory of here's all the other crud we've got on EC2 still, because
Yep.
EC2 is still the bulk of the spend in AWS. I think it's like 60%,
Yep.
70% of their revenue or something like that. So Lambda comes in the territory for an enterprise customer of a rounding error. When you look at the small, medium-sized businesses that are using it, because you're not wrong, it's this whole complete mind shift about how to work with services. Like, no, I'll just run my PHP on a server, thank you, because I understand that. It's when you look at the bills of these small and medium-sized companies, you can see Lambda on it because there isn't a massive EC2 bill hiding it effectively. And their overall usage might actually be lower because lower amounts of workloads, lower amounts of traffic, all that kind of thing. But it's just a more prominent factor of the bill. And I think that's probably where that kind of assumption is coming from. Although, to be really honest, I've never seen a Lambda bill that was bigger than the CloudWatch bill that supported it.
Yeah. Oh, CloudWatch is how Amazon makes you pay for serverless, for sure. But one of the tricks too with running serverless workloads, if you can run an account per application environment, so the dev instance of your app runs in its own AWS account, you can pretty much run it under the free threshold for most of the services that you're going to need. So if you do need external network connectivity, shared VPC across all of the production or non-production workloads, segregating them out, you can actually run it very cheaply.
That's quite interesting, actually. Yeah.
It was A Cloud Guru, I think, that there was this great stat that they managed to run their entire infrastructure, because it's all serverless, for $0 for about 18 months or something like that. It was about 18 months before they had to pay an AWS bill.
And then sold their company for $1 billion.
I don't think there's a direct correlation there, if I'm honest.
Well, they kept the cost low, so that's always attractive to it. Keeps the EBITDA higher, so yeah, it's always attractive to a prospective purchaser. But yeah, it's quite interesting. I'd never really thought about the fact that the free tier is per account. So yeah,
in some cases per region, but it's largely per account.
Yeah.
So that is an interesting cost optimization angle that I'd never really considered before. So you planted a little seed there, Dave, for me to go away and germinate.
Not only limit your blast radius, limit your billing.
Absolutely, yeah. The blast radius part, I'd obviously was, that had been considered before, but the billing part had not. So, interesting one. Anyway, on that note, we have definitely reached the end of our time for season 4, episode 6 of Logicast. So, really appreciate you joining us, Dave. I know it's late at night there, but as we discussed in the preamble, that's pretty normal for you. But it's getting on for lunchtime for us, so I'm not sure we'll have John around for much longer because he'll have to go away and refuel. So John, thank you as always for sharing your insights as well. If you're still listening, thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, we are available to download from wherever you get your podcasts. So please like us, recommend us, share us, etc. If you want to see the funny faces we're pulling when we're talking to you, we are also available to watch on our YouTube channel. So links to all of that in the notes. We'll be back next week with another episode of Logicast for you. In the meantime, thanks for listening. We'll see you again next time.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.